Thank you. I am glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that you're part of Southern Seminary and the direction Southern has gone and the training provided. It's just a great place to be, and I love coming here. I was here for the orientation when Bennett first came, and I just sat and smiled at what was happening, because a lot of things are happening that were needed and have been needed as times have transitioned. Thank you for that rich time of worship this morning. Some of you were leading in that, and I certainly, Dr. Kreider, and I'm going to call you Dr. Lewis if you don't mind. I help you get used to that. May? You'll have your PhD in May? Good for you. Forever. But thank you all for leading. And Dr. Bruton and I were contemporaries here for a while at seminary. So I know that you've probably noticed how young looking he looks, and so you can identify that with me as well, if you will. The last time I was in this choir room with my wife, Kimmy, I had, first of all, just finished an 8-week sabbatical studying how to particularly develop a system of developing worship leaders. We used to do that with children's choirs, youth choirs to some extent. Now, that's not so much the case, and so to develop, as we especially look at multi-sites and looking at multi-venues, that was one area of study. And another area was to look at how churches are doing these multiple venues. So that's currently what happened. But 6 years ago, part of my study was with Dr. Chip Stam. Now, he preceded most of you all here, but he's a wonderful man. He's now gone to be with the Lord. But I came to study conducting with him. And we were over in this part of the choir room and going through one of the hardest conducting exercises I could have ever imagined. It came out of a little pamphlet book called Problems in Conducting. And I'm telling you, there were a lot of problems in that book. I mean, not just, we always deal with multimeter exercises, but when you're changing the tempos and you have to relate to something back here and there and you have to do it quickly. And so we worked for an hour over here, and I mean, my face was wet. I mean, we had worked so hard in this thing, and Dr. Stam, his face was wet. I looked over and Kimmy's face was red, and he stopped and he said, "Boy, Kimmy, he's going to owe you something good, isn't he?" I said, "Yeah," because the choir had kidded over the years, with me and said, "You owe her a new outfit or something like that for what she's done. She's a very good pianist, great partner in ministry." And so she was over there struggling through all this stuff with me, and she said, "I think this is more of jewelry proportions." And so I've tried to fulfill that, but Dr. Stam was such a wonderful man, and it was such a privilege to be able to study with him. If you will, close your eyes and just let me read a passage out of Psalms to help us just sort of get ourselves focused. From Psalm 96, "Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord and praise His name. Proclaim His salvation day after day. Declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and glory are in His sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due His name. Bring an offering and come into His courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of His holiness. Tremble before Him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens rejoice. Let the earth be glad. Let the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Then all the trees of the forest will sing for joy. They will sing before the Lord, for He comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in His truth. What I have to offer today to you is God's story written on my life. things I've learned. You can imagine as you think back over the last week or two, things you've learned and how they've impacted you. Well, imagine then the past month what you've learned. Well, I've paid attention and learned a few things along the way. I've probably missed a lot of things too. But I want to talk about just how God has spoken to me, things He's taught me. So I love to tell stories. I'm going to try to stick to what I'm doing here so we can get through and I won't get sidetracked. But I'm going to talk about, first of all, I was born in the Hopkinsville, Kentucky area, Christian County. You know, in Kentucky, you just talk about counties. You rarely talk about cities. So in Christian County, I grew up doing farm work. I grew up doing construction work. In high school, in grade school, I played sports. I never was in a music group. I never played in a band. I grew up in country churches where they had no concept of music ministry. It was just, there was a song leader and we sang a couple songs and the preacher preached. And so I had no basis at all for what I'm doing now. But in those early years, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned to work hard. Working hard is important in ministry. You can't get in the way of God doing the work in the heart, but there's a lot to be done. And so working hard was something I learned. And playing sports, I learned the value of teamwork. And I learned how that we are on teams in most every aspect of our lives, and certainly with church staffs or with volunteer staffs. How you doing? When I was in those country churches, I remember I was an usher as about an 11 or 12-year-old knucklehead. And then I later graduated to assistant training union director. Have you all ever heard of training union? It became church training, and now it's just generally under a discipleship umbrella. But that's what you did at Sunday nights at church. And so I was assistant training union director and assistant music director. Now, that's pretty wonderful having an assistant music director who's never done a thing in music. But there I was, and we were and I learned, though, that investing in the ministry of the church is important, and you can't be a professional all the time in ministry. You have to invest yourself in something that you can't associate to the paycheck. You know, whatever that is. I teach lead a small group. That's one of them for me. That's not in any part of my job description. I will have various teaching responsibilities out there, or be on mission, or be in the community doing things. It's just important to do that. So that's what I learned, value of hard work and teamwork. Then I went to college, and I don't even remember thinking about God when I was thinking about a major in college. I just said, I kind of like math and science. I think electrical engineering would be good. And so I started pursuing that at the University of Kentucky. And after about a year and a half, or in my really third semester of that, God spoke to my heart, and I realized that I hadn't even consulted Him about what He would want to do with my life. I hadn't consulted Him about most of anything in my life. I was just sort of riding along with salvation decision back here. No mentoring and discipleship per se to this point. Went away to college and kept going to church, but didn't really. God was not personally running my life. He was not in lordship over my life. Remember a while ago I mentioned knucklehead. I still was a knucklehead. Still am. So after that third semester, and I felt that conviction in my life, I did what boys from Christian County, Kentucky do. I found some woods out in eastern Kentucky at Red River Gorge, and I started walking in the woods on Saturdays, just asking God what He wanted to do with me. Well, it took a while to penetrate this, and after about the fourth Saturday of walking in the woods, it was so clear to me, spoke so clearly, when He said, I want you to be a pastor and I want you to use music as your tool. Now, how unlikely is that? But isn't that consistent with what God does? Haven't you seen that in Scripture? He uses the most unlikely to do things. And that's the story of my life. So I thought, well, I'm going to major in music. So I went to the head of the music department at UK and said, I'm ready to sign up to be a music major. I'm ready to sign up to be a music major. And he looked at me and said, well, what have you done in music? And I said, well, not anything. And he said, well, don't you think that might be a little ambitious? And I said, well, God's called me. And so he said, well, why don't you start in the choir? So, okay. I got in the choir, and my first experience in choir, they told me I was a tenor. So I sat in the tenor section, and my first experience in choir from Christian County, Hopkinsville, Kentucky was Beethoven's C Mass Minor, sung in Latin, read in open score. And so it was all foreign to me. But by the time we got to the end of it, I could get some of it and felt like I was contributing. But that was some. But later, upon the advice of a pastor in that one of those small country churches, he said, you really need to go to Georgetown College and to Southern Seminary because you need to develop relationships of partnerships in ministry. And I said, okay. So I went to Georgetown and said, I'm ready to major in music. I said, what have you done in music? I said, well, I sang in the choir at UK. and they said, I tell you what, we believe in the calling of God, and we'll give you a semester just to see. Well, I want to tell you, God enables the called to do what He calls them to do. So, I studied, I worked, and He gave me the ability to go ahead and major in music, and which was really important, important as I saw in what was going on here. And during my last 2 years of my 3 there, so now I'm on the 5-year plan. I don't know if any of you spent the 5-year plan in undergrad, but on the last 2 years, I started as the music director at Southern Baptist Church in Bourbon County, a church of 75, mostly all farmers. When for some reason, people really wanted to sing in the choir, so we had 35 in the choir, and we had the rest in the congregation of the 75. And some people could read a little music, really no one could, and a couple of people couldn't read. They're illiterate, but they had nice smiles. And so everything was fine until tobacco stripping season, when all the women joined the men, and then we had to call off choir practice because there was no one in the choir. They all had to strip tobacco. So that was quite a good experience, and that's Kimmy and I met at Georgetown. And as you see, when you follow the call of God, He brings great rewards into your life, and as He did with Kimmy. And actually, we met when she played for my senior voice recital, and then it sort of blossomed from there. And she came to play at Southern Baptist Church because, as Ms. Hay said, who played the piano, it's as she said, her husband's bad and she needs to take off, which meant he was sick. And so Kimmy started playing, and we started ministry together at that point. It was a wonderful thing. My takeaway from that experience is that I learned that God indeed calls us to ministry. He calls us. It's not just an idea. It's a deep conviction, a deep knowledge. As well as you know your name, you know you're called. And you have to have that because times are going to get rough. Times are going to get uncertain. Your life, things happen and you can doubt at times. People can be mean to you. They really can be mean to you in church. I mean, and if you're in music ministry, everybody's an expert. Like I heard one person say, people know what they like and they like what they know. And so you always get input. And sometimes it's of a critical nature, and you just have to have a call. And then I would say to you that God enables you to fulfill that call because He'll equip you. He will cause the impossible to happen. I cannot tell you how many great opportunities I had through college and growing in leadership and growing in musically because He enabled me. He enabled me to practice 2 hours of voice if they said you're supposed to practice 2 hours of voice. He enabled these old construction hands to practice the piano for an hour. He enabled me to be able to focus to do that. And that was a gift. And as I look back, I really see that it was a gift. Then came the time for seminary. Now, when I started Georgetown, I thought that pastor who had advised me really was just giving me a little extra by saying I needed to go to seminary. I thought college would be enough. But I soon realized that I wasn't going to be equipped to do ministry just through my college experience. And so I came to seminary, and I was surprised by a few, when I took the test to see if you can study at a graduate level, I was surprised that there were a couple of auditions that were given at that time. One, the piano, which is pretty scary. And I managed to almost meet proficiency. I came to class piano 4, which Kimmy vouched for me. That was a miracle, wasn't it? But the bad thing is Sandra Turner still teaching here? Just retired? Well, she was the class piano teacher, and I was the only one in the class she made fill out a practice schedule because everybody else could play so much better. And I was practicing. I just shouldn't have been in class piano 4. Anyway, but the thing is, now imagine I came in and passed everything but instrumental arranging, which I'd never had. And that's a miracle of God. You think about it, studying 3 years in college with no background. I didn't know what a triplet was on my first rhythmic dictation test. I mean, I was really ignorant. And so that's, God has shown and been faithful throughout this whole experience. And through seminary, it's a wonderful experience. It was the music school was more like a conservatory then and an education program. It was, at that time, you were equipped to do traditional and very really strong art music, and study to do graded choirs and all that sort of thing. And I studied to be the very best I could in those, and until Living Hope had those programs. But it was a great experience. But we were required, as we should have been, to take some classes in theology and some classes in, Old Testament survey, those sorts of things. And I found out during my seminary days that you cannot study Scripture academically and avoid studying it devotionally and expect to survive just in your heart. You have to develop spiritual disciplines in your lives or you cannot do ministry. And this showed me right here that as I became, I read 30 chapters of the Pentateuch. Now I did my thing today. Did not penetrate the heart. And so my takeaway from seminary was study hard and develop deep spiritual disciplines that will last. Prayer, study, witness, quietness or meditation, to still the soul and to strengthen the soul. That foundation has to be built. During that time at seminary, I moved to a church in outside of Fort Campbell where I'd started as music and youth for the summer, and they upped my pay from $50 to $80 a week to cover the drive from seminary to Hopkinsville, which is three hours or so, and a time change. And that, and then after Kimmy and I got married, my last semester here, I worked at Louisville Seed Company on Thursdays, moving seed and sweeping floors, which is kind of a nice break from some of the other routine. But again, the opportunity to work hard in whatever way. I learned the joy and the value of my wonderful partner in ministry, Kimmy, too, as we married and then served together. Okay, seminary finished, and the seminary placement service sent out resumes all over the place. And I started getting these calls, sort of calls. You know, they have 20 resumes that might be okay, and you hear from somebody and then you never hear from them, and you hear from somebody and, oh no, Oklahoma, Texas. That's a long way from the Commonwealth. Anyway, I learned to exercise some faith because right at the last moment, First Baptist Jolton contacted me. That's a church outside of Nashville. And they had contacted me. They had about 325 in attendance, and they contacted me as a music minister. And I had a textbook job description that had things on it that they didn't have at that church. And so they weren't really sure what they wanted to do with me. I was the first one. We thought that there might have been a challenge with the pastor in that church. And after we arrived, we were sure there were problems with the pastor and the church. And we felt compelled to go there, so we did. In the midst of the pastor and the church and the challenges and all that sort of thing, I said, you know, these senior adults are really discouraged. We'll start a senior adult program. I didn't really have enough to do there. And so did that, and that ended up being a wonderful thing. But I thought, you know, I need to leave here after about 2 years. This is just no good. And so I sent out some resumes, and then I ended up at seminary for a function and came across Dr. Eugene Quinn. He used to be the state music guy here in Kentucky. And I said, Dr. Quinn, you know, this is our talk, you know, anything going on in Kentucky, you know, churches, you know, that old talk that you hear that shouldn't be going on probably. And he said, well, Benny, tell me about your church. And I said, well, you know, it's just bad, the pastor and the people, and the integrity problems and all that. And then he said what I didn't expect, and I want you all to hear this. This changed my life. He said, Benny, there are people going all over the country with a 2-year program because they could not develop the ability to work through problems where they were. And so God took them to a church, and then they moved themselves. They moved themselves out of that church. Benny, if you will stick it out there until God moves you, it'll mean everything to you. Now, this was profound. I don't know if you've heard this before, because there's a way that we do things. Like in the world, we send out resumes and all this. I became so ashamed that I'd done that, so convicted. And went back for 3 years, one of the most wonderful years ever. And God blessed them. There was actually a year that after the pastor left, that they actually asked me to be in charge of all the church ministries. Sort of the pastor that didn't preach. And I learned so much then. And so that it impacted me so much that our next church was 15 years, and our next church was so far 13 years. And it's just that if God plants me, then why would I move myself? And that's driven my life since then. And God's been faithful in what He taught me there. When Pleasant Valley called, I felt like I was being unfaithful to my church. That's how much I loved the church. And we hated to go. Bennett is named after our neighbor there, Mr. and Ms. Bennett, who profoundly impacted our lives. That's how rich ministry became once we got our head back in where God placed us. Very important, I think. That's Becca also came along while we were in Jolton, and we learned that God makes very spirited children, very spunky children, even at a year old or at 2 weeks old, when Kimmy went out and bought the Strong-Willed Child book by James Dobson. and Bennett came along 7 years later after our courage was renewed. Okay, so I get this call out of the blue from Pleasant Valley Baptist Church in Kansas City. I'd never been to Kansas City. I wasn't even sure. How many think Kansas City is in Kansas? How many think it's in Missouri? How many think it's in Oklahoma? The rest of it's in Missouri. The one that always referred to as Kansas City, but Kansas City, Kansas is inside of Kansas City, Missouri. And then it's a very large area of. And the pastor there called out of the blue, and the reason he did is because the guy who preached at Jolton during the time that year I was talking about of interim pastoring was Dr. Morton Rose. He was the vice president at the then Sunday School Board, which now is Lifeway. He retired, moved to Kansas City, joined this church. He went up to the pastor and said, I worked with just a guy for this church. The church had about 1,000 in attendance then, and we reluctantly even pursued it, but knew we had to. And after a lot of time together, we knew we were to move, and we did, and we hated it. It was so difficult to move, and we went there and got on the fastest ride of our lives. The church over that period of time grew from 1,000 to over 4,000 in attendance. We had 800 on Saturday night, which had been going 10 years while I was there. The Sunday morning thing was orchestra choir driven, is band driven on Saturday night. We had different teams completely for those. We had a production schedule that turned my hair white. And Dr. Lewis, yeah, there you are. You're still here. He became acquainted with it. He was in a huge production schedule down in West Palm Beach, and he even thought this was crazy. What it had become, and share with the pastor about that. It was a fast moving church, and it was a church that was on the very edge of the worship movement, and so things started coming into my world that I couldn't imagine. Things like rhythm sections, drum sets, electric guitars, music that was highly experiential in its content. All of this was happening. That's when all the worship wars happened. That's when the Willow Creek stuff exploded. And I went there and I saw these people and I thought, am I in another country? What's going on here? And it just blew me. I had no category for it. And so I was faced with this. Was I going to start selling life insurance like a lot of my friends did who said no to their calling? Or was I going to make the changes needed to keep ministering? And God enabled me to make the changes. And a lot of what I was trained in wasn't directly useful in what we were doing there. It grew and it grew. I had to become a leader. I really had to become a leader. And that's how all this craziness could happen, is the volunteer base grew so solid and so big that so much was being done by the church and continued to be done by the church after I left, after 15 years. In 15 years, what I would say to you is if God gives you the opportunity to be in a ministry this long, this much can happen over that time. And it's beautiful to be able to spend that much time in a ministry. And the people, you get to multi-generations of families you get to be involved with. It's just a blessing. It's just so rich. And I love people, love to be around people. I'm energized by being around people. And I would hate to think that I had to be an evangelist and pop in and pop out and not be able to invest and be able to see children. The children of the former children, just the generations. I got to be part of a relocation during that time to 85 acres, a whole church campus, and that's huge, and it's hard, and it's probably not going to happen too much in the future as plants and small worship gatherings and churches appear more and more. But we relocated, and that was just unbelievable. I had to learn how to get everything just right in the buildings, which are all brand new, oversee that and try to keep the other going, and it was just crazy. But God enabled me to do it. I told you, lots of productions, all that kind of stuff, which then was kind of being used to reach people. Now it's diminished quite a bit in that. So the takeaway from that is change is inevitable. I can tell you that it's not always going to be band driven like you're used to. It's not always going to be like we experienced in chapel this morning with an orchestra providing the oomph for holy, holy, holy. And when I was here, by the way, they fired up that 113 rank Aeolian Skinner pipe organ, which I know they still do at times here, and just shook the place. But that was beautiful this morning and just as fine, and it was great. I just loved it, and really was engaged in worshiping God through it. But it's not always going to be that way. I can guarantee you, we're in a time when the stream is running fast and the log we're on going down is slippery. And it's going to change. You may end up with a kazoo and an auto harp led service. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just know it's going to. I know that it's going to keep changing. And you have to create a category for change because it's going to change. Not only is it going to change, everything around you, your pastor is going to change on you. And you're going to change on you. And you're going to have to deal with all kinds of change. You're more equipped because you have been submerged in it. In my early days, things didn't change very fast, especially in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And so things will change. And here's something else I want you to hear, very much. This profoundly impacted me. During the last year of my time at Pleasant Valley, it happened to me what Dr. Lewis predicted would happen when he spoke with the pastor there later. My spiritual life started, I couldn't sustain everything. I was too tired. I was too a lot of things. And my intimacy with God subsided some. And I got to a place where I didn't enjoy anything I was doing. It was sheer discipline just to show up. And I was burning out. And I sought some help on that. And I never was at the point where I couldn't get out of bed or I wanted to sleep all the time or that kind of stuff. But ministry's hard. And the moment you accepted the call, the target got a little bit more defined on your back. So the evil one wants to mess you up. He wants to destroy you. And he can influence a whole lot of people if he can destroy you. And so it's a battle. And your family's in the battle. And just know, if without the calling, you cannot face the battle. And the battle's real. And the battle was real with me that year. And came through that and was ready to go again. And that's when God called us to Living Hope. And it occurred to me during in that battle, in that last struggle time, that, I've done everything I can imagine I'd want to do in being successful. And I realized I was going to the second half of my ministry, from success to significance, investing for the future, investing. And so then God put me in a place where I could. Another thing I want you to hear is, and you can anticipate that, but here's the thing for right now. When the church, I'd been there 15 years, the staff they were messing with us and built a hee-haw set, a hee-haw script. You all know what hee-haw is. It's a comedy show used to be done down in Nashville. And they did it and put all of our names in it and did that for a send-off. All of the worship ministries and all got together and did a roast, which ended up being nice and not roastful. And then the church sent us off. And in that line that went for hours, because it's a large church and we've been there a long time, no one said to me, "Benny, thank you for that song. Thank you for that production. Thank you for that thing," whatever it is. They said, "Thank you for coming to my mother's funeral. You remember when you came and saw me in the hospital? You remember when you sat with me when my spouse died and we sat there until the doctor came? Do you remember that hard time you helped me through? Man, I came here in this big church. I didn't know what to do, and you helped me find a place in ministry." Those are the things I heard. And that truly changed. And I thought, I've been doing all this stuff, and what was the most important was just something I did because I thought I wanted to, but I should do it. So that was something. Also, I found out that trying to balance life is always going to be tough. No matter, it's hard for you as students. Some of you are married students, and that adds another dimension. Some of you are working 40 hours a week and you're students. You're trying to balance all this stuff out. Even just being a student's enough. Trying to balance out how much time do I put in this and this. And I found that I was not so successful a lot of the time at Pleasant Valley balancing with my family as I should. I did work and my family, and sometimes work was this and my family was this. And Kimmy was out there in a place where there was no support family-wise, with small children, one small child, and a very strong second mother to that child. She thought she was, Becca, but her daughter thought so Bennett had two mothers pretty much. And so, she had that, and I'm over here doing all this stuff. Please always keep in mind that you got nothing without your family. You got nothing. So, okay, then Pastor Jason Pettis called it Living Hope out of the blue. We thought we would be living the rest of our lives there at Pleasant Valley. Not God's plan. He took us to Living Hope. And it was a smaller church, which didn't matter at all. But just remember, you can be called to a smaller church. God will do that. It's not always to a bigger church. But I got to tell you, the thing that I've experienced here, about a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, the pastor asked me to be less hands-on on the stage, on the platform in the worship ministry, and to pull back and oversee pretty much everything, it seems like. And I realized that as you get older, that your value to a church might not be what you do, but it may be who you are. The experience you've gotten, the things you've learned. And so I'm navigating through this right now. But I can tell you that I can see it's just it's a struggle not being with the people that I've done ministry with. Those people who play, those people who sing, the choir, being up in the midst of it. But I can see that there's so much more to be done, especially as we get more multi-site. I'm going to have to be in a lot of places. And I understand that. I've gone kicking and screaming a little bit in the battle, but it's been another battle. But it's a battle that God has led me through quite a bit, and it will continue to do that. But my takeaway from the experience is that investing is a nice word. Equipping the saints is a nice phrase. But to do it, in doing it, there's a cost. And it may be the stuff you like to do, to invest well. And that's the lesson I'm learning right now. Now, I don't have any retirement age. I'm 58. I'm kind of thinking that maybe at least till 70. I don't know what else I would do because I love doing this so much. I don't know what I would retire to do. I just love doing this. I would see myself even volunteering doing this. There's our pastor in his doctoral work was in a class, and he brought back a concept that really made a lot of sense to him. He said, when you start out in life, you start growing in what you do and who you are, and at some point they converge. And what you do is and who you are have become much of the same thing. And they both move. That you do the things that you're most made to do, that God has made you to do, and you're giving you experience to do, and you're at that sweet spot of maybe a highest impact even. So I've got some summaries. I've got 12 things, and a third one Dr. Gray reminded me of, which I assumed, and I'm going to just say that one first, is it's a dangerous thing to develop compartments in your life. If you're different at home than you are in ministry or with these people and that people or in your private life, Satan's always trying to destroy you, and he does it with those compartments, and that'll mess you up. And you cannot sustain living in the compartments. Sometime you're going to be in the wrong compartment at the wrong time. You just can't live in compartments. Probably causes psychiatric problems too. It probably just messes you up totally. But here's the other 12 things that I would say. Develop a strong foundation for ministry by developing strong spiritual disciplines. Learn to be a good team member. Work hard in ministry, living out of a clear calling. God enables those whom He calls. God places His called into churches. We need to stay until He calls us away. Learn to joyfully work under the authority of the pastor. Be skilled in your ministry tool of music, but be ready to adapt methods and change according to the needs of the church. You're trained in music, but the need might be senior adults. The need might be music and youth. The need might be a lot of things. And ministry is ministry. Okay. Be a good shepherd by caring for, encouraging, and investing into people. Don't neglect the minister or pastor part of your calling. Strive for life balance. Love your spouse and children. Do not choose church over them time and time again. They must have priority in our lives. Be ready to adapt to different roles in ministry as you gain experience and grow in discovering your gifts and abilities. Remember that our most specific job description in Scripture is to equip the saints for ministry. Our tendency is to do ministry. We must equip. Music ministry is primarily a people job, not a music job. So that's what I have within this time frame. I've got so many anecdotal stories. That's another thing that's beautiful about years. You gain all kinds of stories, like the time I baptized Mama in a bathtub, or on and on and on. Not my mama. They called her Mama. So there are many, many, many things that are, funny stories and funny things that happen. But just sticking to this. Now, and I asked Kimmy if she would be available if y'all had any questions maybe from a perspective of Kimmy as spouse or as partner in ministry. You could ask Bennett any questions. I didn't ask him if you could, but I hope it's all right, Bennett. As growing up in a high pace, high energy, hyper church world, because he was born in Kansas City and we moved to Bowling Green after his 4th grade year. By the way, we moved to Bowling Green after Becca's junior year in high school. She's not bitter or anything. We spent her senior year in Bowling Green. And Becca's wonderful. She's absolutely a delight. She reminds us every once in a while of what kind of situation we put her in. I said, Becca, I'm not blaming God. I'm just saying He compelled us to come. We had to come and we hated to leave. We got to remind her a lot. Okay. Okay. What questions might you have of any of us? Come to mind. Yes, sir.
What were some intentional things that you would do to encourage busy, like production and all that stuff, but also investing in the church, but also what intentional things you do to invest in your faith while also investing in the church?
Well, as I said, I didn't do all that well at that. I thought I did. But there's no one like your children to kind of explain how it was, Some things I've done when I've been on track is like most every Friday is Kimmy's and mine. We go to breakfast, we spend the day, a lot of the day together, and sometimes all the day together. And that's very important for us. I have tried to be intentional, even though it wasn't scheduled, to spend time individually with Bennett and Becca. Again, and I think what I would do now, though, I think I would have a schedule that would have distinct family nights together. That I would find ways to show significance to them. But I can't say that I was successful for long enough till it was, probably more so at Living Hope than Pleasant Valley. Oh, I'm sorry. How about you?
One of the things that you did with Bennett that I noticed was that you partnered to assemble something?
A lot of the time, I guess you'd call quality time would be Dad and I together at church. You know, it happened that I've always been, we think a lot alike, we were interested in a lot of the same things, and so we, you know, it worked out that I was able to help him in some of his, you know, projects that he had to get done. You know, like if he got a new, I don't remember putting together, well, I kind of remember putting together a piano dolly, and I would just be there and, you know, hand him the tools or, you know, help try and tighten bolts and things like that. And I enjoyed doing that. And then, you know, that also lended itself to conversations, you know, various, you know, father-son kind of things while we were doing, you know, the menial tasks.
I hope that was somewhat helpful. Big thing is, you just got to decide it's important. Then we find ways of making it happen then. Yeah. Yes, sir.
To piggyback on what Jared was touching on, do you have any observations, and I'm not trying to say this in any bad way, but just from you as a previous generation to this generation, do you have any observations of like who we are, how we function, the whole idea of distractions and scheduling and trying to make this time, and yet we're trying to read this blog and do this homework assignment and be there with our wife or our husband and just there's a lot of just mind spinning. And so I just wonder if forgive me, the older generation, the previous generation sees this and is saying, hey, this is where we need to watch out.
You know, sort of the names changed to protect the innocent kind of thing from when you know, the one thing that you all face that I'm keenly aware of is you've got so many options. I mean, I had few options when I was making key decisions. You have so many options. And I find myself just being submerged in media. I mean, I have a hard time myself just trying to not look at the phone when it buzzes. And, you know, I love all the technology. I mean, I love it. The more, the better. And, but it kills you. And so I would say that just like I had to do in whatever my world was, that you have to find a way to schedule whatever it is that's pressing on you and manage the time, because and that will change to something else. I mean, you know, you're going to probably live a lot of years, and you know, as things change in your family. I mean, when a child comes into your family, that's huge. I mean, that's a major change. And, you know, you're discovering your roles. You're trying to operate on not much sleep, and you're trying to do something that you have no idea what you're doing. And it's you know, that's tough. Well, I mean, I don't know what all the things are, but I imagine that some of the things that you're talking about, just in you mentioned there, the reading the blog, you know, I face that same thing in my daily, just trying to, and I think the biggest decision is I'm going to block out what's important, and I'm going to let the other stuff fall in around the outside. And I don't know if I answered your question, or if I even addressed your question on that, but it's going to be and it's always going to be there. And I feel like that you all have a lot more of that stuff than I had to deal with. However, I'm dealing with it now, some of it as well. You know, right now, okay, you think, okay, Bennett's in grad school, Becca's in and out of grad school teaching, everything's calming down. Well, my parents are 85 and 89, and I've recently had to go through a whole year of them, both of them almost dying, then them coming out of the home they've lived in 56 years, moving them in assisted living in Bowling Green, and I've spent a lot of this sabbatical in the house trying to help go through 56 years of stuff. I had no category for that. I couldn't have imagined what that was like. But it's been horrendous. It's been emotional. It's been tough. And yet that's a thing I never expected. It just came to me. And I know that that's going to happen over and over and over. And I think if somehow, to the best we can, if we can find the main things and protect them, that we'll have a lot more chance of doing the main things. So I hope that helped.
You mentioned there's always people with opinions, there's always this criticism, there's always strained relationships, there's always situations that weigh heavy on us serving. What part of that, where do you draw the line on taking that home, sharing with your wife, your family? How do you balance, if you get an email at 3:30 and you're leaving at 4 o'clock, do you drop that, and what do you take home? How do you balance that? How do you rationalize that in your mind?
Matthew, I've been more successful at times than others with that too. But one thing I've always felt like is I've always wanted to protect Kimmy from things that I knew would temporarily be handled by me, but could taint her whole outlook on everything. I mean, I'm thrilled that Bennett and Becca love church. I mean, that's God's grace. I mean, I couldn't have done enough to have caused them to like it, and certainly did. It was in an environment that could have caused them not to like it, or love Jesus, you know. But I didn't take the work so much home in the midst of the highest peak, but a lot of myself was so I guess beaten up and adrenaline filled and high paced that when I got home, I couldn't be home for a while. I was still there. And on the criticism part that comes, I mean, most people are not mean. Some are, but most people aren't. They're really telling you something else when they tell you, couldn't we do this or couldn't we do that? And I discovered something at a funeral back in Jolton years after I'd been there. And I went back, and there's a dear lady, Ms. Bennett, it's her funeral. And they started singing things, and it occurred to me that we all have markers. Music is such a powerful thing. And, you know, my first date with my wife, there's a song that I remember that by. Well, when people have come to Christ, there's been a song they've remembered, or when the significant things have happened in their life, a lot of times there's been a song, and that's why they want to sing that song. It's not they want to stay in the past, it's just that they want to have something that helps them remember, a standing stone, if you will. And so most of the time they're not trying to tell you what to do or anything. They're just expressing a desire in their heart based on, maybe they're desperate in their life over something. They just want something they can hold on to when the world's slippery. And so I understand that. And when I found that I've got to be absolutely in sync with the leadership. So it's not my deal, but it's our deal. And that's number one. Number two, I listen. I try to listen to what's being said, not what they're saying. I try to listen to their heart, because you never want to be somebody who won't listen. That's not going to go well for you. Yes, sir.
I guess this is similar to things you've already said, but you said when you left Kansas City, then the church there, they kind of valued more your pastoral care than the music you gave them. How obviously there's always going to be pressures all the time kind of in our jobs. Is there anything practical you've done when you look at your diary or when you think about your ministry that I'm going to make time for people, I'm going to drop that because of this pastoral care? How do you prioritize?
It's kind of a fine line to walk. Because on one hand, codependency. Here I am to save the day. Come in to the hospital. I'm here, and you gotta be needed. And then over here where somebody will see them, they'll be all right. They got doctors, or something. And people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I firmly believe that you've got to express care to people. I mean, you're a shepherd. You don't go out in the field with a bunch of sheep and say, good luck, hope a wolf doesn't get you or something. So, to me, there are times that you've got to drop it and respond. Sometimes people come unannounced to your office. You always drop it at least long enough to find out if you can divert to a later time if you're in a bind. But people are not an interruption. People are the ones you're there to shepherd. And so to me, there you kind of get to where you discern whether you should go, but mostly, and I can't tell you how many times I've been there at the point of death because God prompted me to go. God prompts you to go. If He prompts you to have to drive 3 hours to a funeral, get in the car and go. I mean, He'll lead you on that. And so that's kind of my experience right there. If I'll listen, He leads me. And I've been so glad that I've said to Kimmy, oh, I don't want to go, but I know I need to go. And I'm going.
I've been in bigger churches, in bigger ministries with lots of people. How have you got to know your people?
Well, you have to understand you're only going to get to know so many. And you can't carry a burden of expectation that's impossible to meet. So the larger the church, the more you're pretty much going to know your ministry area and some more. Our church does a great thing in that we serve on call, where we're carrying the care of the whole church at times. We have ways that we're keeping ourselves around other people, and we try to do ministry things together to do that. But again, our church, we have 2,000 in attendance. It's a big church, but it's not a huge church when you think of Twice That or some of these. I went to church on my sabbatical. They were expecting 40,000 that weekend. I mean, and it wasn't in Houston. I did not go there. It was up in Cincinnati. They were having the Super Bowl of preaching, of all things. I got in the middle of that. Scary. I didn't know if I was going to get out or not. But anyway, I think, it energizes me to go out before the service if I can and shake hands with people. But I'm extroverted. Some people, if you're introverted, you usually need to be by yourself to get energized. And so we're not all made the same. But for me, being around people helps. And so I try to meet as many as I can. But realistically, you're going to know some real well. And you're going to know their names and their family. It's a skill that's worth trying to develop, though, because it means everything to someone if you go up to them and follow up on a situation they've had or ask about their child that was born 2 weeks ago or something. It means a lot to them. So that's why I'd say you cannot be unrealistic in your expectations, but you need to expect a lot out of yourself when it comes to people.